All right, we're recording. Michael, what's going on, man? Good to see you.
You too, man. It's been you were here a year ago, correct? A
I
year.
was
Was it a
there
year?
in October, the October
Oh, okay. So
symposium.
almost it. Okay, so a couple months. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it was good to watch you work and get to know you, and then find out that you're doing all of this good work as well. So it was a pleasure to have you come into our space, and I'm glad to see that it's blossomed into something more than just me yelling philosophy at you while you're training hard.
yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is, and so for people who are like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Michael Blevins, nonprofit. You, Mark Twight. Who's the nonprofit team? Like, never quite sure what's the official roster there.
I mean, officially, it's me and Mark. And obviously Aaron in the background, helping with everything. And now we have apprentice Lucas Cornish, and we have a assistant coach Devin, and that's kind of like that makes up the gym side of it. And other than that, we have help from Berkey from Station 515, but he'll do some writing for us. He'll come out and help teach some of the symposiums. And then as far as the programming, athletic side of it goes, our online program, the space program, I have myself, Keegan Dillon, Mark Twight. Aaron will sometimes write for it. James Ellis. There's a host of people that kind of pop in and out. Who's been consistent for the past 6 months, which I'm really excited about, is Andrew Tracy out of the UK. He's a writer for Men's Fitness UK. He does a phenomenal job about bridging this gap, kind of like separating the fitness industry and making it a little bit more applicable to, like, I would hate to say blue collar, but like the middle class who might not be affiliated with sports. And so kind of like health and well-being, and probably one of the biggest demographics that I see is missing good information. So he does this amazing job on the space program about taking these like insanely weird ideas and kind of
Hmm.
distilling it down so that the average person is like, oh man, I never thought of that. When people think about doing a workout, they're so often like, what exercise, what duration, and am I going to get yoked? That's like basically what's going on. And he's feeding that need. Like, there's definitely like a sense of work accomplishment in it, but in it he just loves to put these like Zen Cohen style, hey, have you thought about your breath while you're running? And you're like, it's just like
Hmm.
very good awareness stuff. And so I've been really excited to have him on. We've had a host of really good coaches: Paul Warrior, Elodie, Ellisaurus on Instagram. We've had like kind of a whole bunch of people come in and help us build this thing out. Now it's kind of like a insane, I would say, library of knowledge in training concepts and ideas. So that's kind of the basis for nonprofit is me and Mark, and then we elicit help from anybody who will help us.
Yeah. So where did the name, if you don't mind sharing, like
Oh, sure.
nonprofit, where did it come from?
Just a deep sense of irony, I think. So this is kind of how it always goes. Mark and we were kind of over the fitness stuff, and I mean, like, we're still fitnessing, but like, I didn't want to start a fitness brand. I didn't think that's what we had been doing. Like, I really saw that the work that we did in movie projects and military projects was based off of kind of teaching people, for lack of a better term, just philosophy and
Yeah.
meaning. And so it became kind of a different thing. But we didn't want to do movie jobs anymore. So we were really looking to basically just like do what we wanted, which was talk about concepts. So we rented an office and we're like, oh, let's do a podcast. And we did the podcast and we started recording. It took us like 6 months to kind of like, test. We didn't put anything out. We were recording episodes kind of all the time, but also having these conversations about what we should do. And we were talking about publishing zines, just like ridiculous stuff. Maybe we should publish a book. Maybe we should write a book. We started on a book actually. Originally, I should bring this poster over, but I have it pinned on my dartboard over there. Um, we're like, let's just, it was my idea, but I was kind of like, Mark, I'm so sick of people talking about the work that you've done. I was talking about him. I didn't really care about people talking about the work that I've done. But I was like, you should just write a quick book talk about, movie training and military and get this shit out of the way and we can move on and it'll sell like crazy. And he was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's write that. And I was like, no, 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 no. I said that you should write it. And he goes, no, we should. And I was like, ah, fuck. So we started this project without a name, without a business, without anything. And we started writing this book and we had really like high aspirations. We were like, oh, fucking publishers are going to eat this up. We've got intimate knowledge of Hollywood. We've got all these insane stories from training celebrities. And we've done these massive transformations on like some of the world's, I know, like A-list celebrities basically. And you're like, it's not what I want to talk about though. And so I know we're really like pitching this so that we can get our own thing going. And in the middle of this thing, we're like, oh, in order to actually launch a podcast, you need an LLC or you need some kind of business name. And we're like throwing around concepts like call it Defy, call it like I just like the most ridiculous names that were tough and like made us sound cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, we just need a placeholder. And I've been playing with this funny, it was literally a joke, a play on a double entendre. And I made this poster I was playing with vectors at the time in Illustrator. And I had kind of the Che Guevara like vector. And I like gave him gold teeth. And I put like, follow a prophet. And it was with an F. And I was like, oh man, it would be funny if we call it a nonprofit and it was with a PH. And I was like, let's just call our business that. It's just the LLC. We can do a DBA later. We'll do, we'll change it, obviously, because that's a ridiculous name. And so we launched it as that. And then we called the podcast Dissect because we were, dissecting problems and cultural issues. And I don't know what happened, but it just stuck. And it was like ridiculous because literally all we do is tell people what's going to happen and what they should do about it. And so to claim that we are non-profiteering is kind of a joke because that's literally, it's just irony. And now I have to live with it because it gets deep. It gets even weirder than that. I don't know how weird you want to get, but
we can get as weird as we need to. Weird is good.
All right. So I fall into these states of consciousness, generally what most people would describe as a flow state when they start to write, right? Like everybody, they call it the muse. Writers will go for walks so they can like get these neurochemicals going. If you want to induce a flow state, I think Stephen Kotler talks about like go for a 5K, smoke a couple hits of a joint that has like sativa blend THC in it or something, and then have like 65 milligrams of coffee. You're like, wake and bake, drink some coffee, go for a run, and you've started all the neurochemistry responsible for a flow state. Well, when I get into these flow states, I'm highly productive, but I don't control it. So like I can't control what I'm writing about. And a lot of the stuff that I start writing about is like very weird, esoteric, semi-pseudo, I would even call it, in the Hermetic tradition, this is like called being an oracle, where you don't, like, I've never read about this stuff. I just have these concepts that come through. I'll start writing about it. Anyway, I went to go talk to some weird shaman lady about it because I was kind of freaked out. Like I would like pull over to the side of the road and I would kind of come back to, and I would have pages and pages. One time I wrote on the side of the road in one nonstop blurb, 3,000 words for, it was kind of like a guided meditation. That became our guided meditation that I'm using now for our breath workshops.
Wow.
And I've never edited it. I've never even tried to edit it. It's just, it is what it is. And I have no idea where it came from, but it's essentially a story of, leaving your body, cleansing yourself by passing through the earth and coming into the core of what I would call the earth's big power and your big power, removing your egocentrism, and then rising back through like a filtration system up above the earth to get a, 20,000 foot view, 40,000 foot view of kind of the cosmos and the feeling of being connected to everything, and then having that earth pull you back down into your body. And all of this was in kind of a trance state. So I started asking this shaman lady, who was really wild. She knows your name and that's basically it. And she like goes off for an hour or two. And I guess she's consulting I guess you'd call it the Akashic records. I told you it
Wow.
gets weird, so I'm warning you.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
she came back. She knew my genealogy. She understood my heritage. She knew where my family was from. She knew things about me that nobody could possibly know. And one of the things that she said, she's like, you keep calling it like, uh, I guess, performance of an oracle because these you don't know where these words come from. She's like, but they are you. You can trust this like sense of yourself. She's like, but technically, it's your seventh generation ancestor that was you. And he was Norwegian, and he grew up in this town, and he was also what people would call a prophet. And I was like,
What?
are you fucking kidding me? And I was like, do you realize I own a company called Nonprofit? And she just started laughing hysterically. And she goes, "Do you know what's funny? Like one of the things I got is that your life is defined by irony. Like whenever you can find a deep sense of irony, you'll actually enjoy that process because you love paradox." And I was like,
No kidding.
"Oh my god." Okay, so that that's a long journey of the name into the company and some of the weird shit that we're into. So
I love it.
that's
I
kind of where
love
it
it.
stemmed from.
It's I mean, it reminds me of kind of what people refer to when, having like maybe like a psilocybin journey or a psychedelic experience of like the download, where it's not
Yeah,
like this, manufactured kind of like one level of the mind, but this net like just sort of like, oh, it's there. I'm just kind of pulling it down and experiencing it and then just being like the antenna to then transmit through.
yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. I should say like most of these are most of most of the experiences that I have are they're lucid and sober states, but not all of
Yeah,
them.
sure.
And and maybe I opened up something when I started using substances like that. Um, I don't use as many anymore, but originally I got deep into maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. I got really into trying to understand psychedelic use, and that led to like quite a lot of development. Just not even just emotionally, but professionally. Like how I think about our industry that we're involved in and the very close approximation that we have between like movement as medicine and therapy and process and kind of all of these things that people might look to substances in order to pull out, and they might be interested in it because they hear somebody had epiphanies and like divine experiences. Or and I think it the language changes, but it's all kind of the same concept. I think we all kind of understand like, no, 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 no. This is not information that I had in my brain, and now I'm saying it, and that doesn't make any sense. I would say to get out of the metaphysical or supernatural sense of it, it is you. Um, it's just the same thing with like having this conversation, but it's like magnified. Like I don't know what I'm going to say next, but
Hmm.
something coordinates in my brain based off of a subject or a word that you say, and ideas start to flow. And I think the more you open up that channel, the better you get at it. And the more
Hmm.
connections you're making between your experiences and your ideas and your feelings and your thoughts. And all of this stuff kind of like coalesces into maybe a written piece or an artistic piece or a musical piece. I never realized until I started learning music that this was the process for learning music. That some of the best artists in the world, and it's not that it's not work, like when you're actually composing music, you're sitting down and you're doing hard work every day. You're listening to notes and chord progressions and tones and different keys, and you're harmonizing with that, and you're coming up with different rhythms, but eventually something will spark, and maybe it's a word, maybe it's a sentence, maybe it's a paragraph, and then a song will start to form, and then you will broaden it out. But the song doesn't actually exist. And from what I've learned from music teachers that teach me and people that I've respected kind of in the same vein, is they will never attribute their songs to their own creation. they think about it as a revelation. They're revealing an intricate part of the universe and maybe putting it together for other people, but they inherently think about it as like a download, like, oh, something is
Yeah.
transmitting and I'm picking up on that signal and I'm playing it for people. And this becomes kind of a responsibility for people as musicians. It's like I've trained very hard just so I can receive and then also give this transmission, which I think is profound because it maps on to what I respect about mathematics and the difference in like when people uh, get into highline mathematics, they don't ever say that they invented it, right? Like nobody invented a formula or Euler's proof or any of these like really sound philosophical mathematical proofs. People will always refer to it as I discovered it, as I like it was already part of the universe. I just unmasked it. And so I think that goes it takes your ego out of it, which is a huge part in the creative process is removing a deep sense of self and arrogance out of the way so that you can reveal what the universe kind of wants you to do. Or maybe that sounds a little bit too esoteric for people, but there's some kind of thing there that I think is important, um, in no matter what the subject, whether you're talking about healing or you're talking about athletics. There is this, I don't know, different stages of recognizing yourself in the world. And that's a lot of what I think we do and talk about is kind of the bigger subjects are related to this, but it's also, there's nowhere to talk about it. And that becomes
Yeah.
what people think is, maybe that's what people are attracted to our thing is they come into a symposium and we're talking about ideas and concepts that aren't exactly being shared at, a workroom break table or even a family dinner table or, our dinner table is a little bit different, but I go to a family dinner and like, man, this is like the most superficial. You talking about, politics and Ukraine and, whatever COVID or like whatever these kind of like you notice immediately like, oh, that's why the media is powerful because they control
Mhm.
people's conversations. Not that it's
Mhm.
bad or we shouldn't know what's going on in the world, but man, if that's what most of your conversations about, you're missing a big piece. And I think what we've done is go, man, people want to have these, they don't have an open space to talk about them. And I'm not going to say it's safe because it's definitely not a safe space, but we do treat conversation like a sandbox, right? Like build your idea out of sand and let other people step on it and don't get hurt by it. Understand that it wasn't a good concept to begin with, or let other people build onto your idea and let it topple over or whatever. And that's kind of the metaphor that I think of pretty much all ideas is they're not good until other people try to destroy them.
Mm. Mhm.
And so that's kind of the center of how we work.
Yeah, it's interesting in that sort of like relating it back to the fitness industry too, which, I think we share many of the same just like frustrations with, to put it mildly. But like in a world where everyone owns something, it's like that's mine. Like I was talking actually with messaging a little bit with Andrew Tracy about this, and I was like, yeah, it's really cool to see you people, Michael, nonprofit, all these like dudes or gals and people who are like together uniquely, differently, but similarly, and not this incessant need to piss on every single fire hydrant you see.
Yeah.
Be like, oh, that's like right on. Like, there's plenty of fire hydrants to go around, and they serve the purpose of like when needed, pools together, almost like a mycelial like network where like, hey, where's they're connected, but it's not so, like, no, this is the limit of my boundary or my border, or this is like what I own. And I guess that's one of the things that I appreciated at Symposium was it was a conversation, it was a discussion, it was an exploration. It wasn't like a dogmatic, um, you know, overly defensive, proving situation, but also not weak in the sense of like, if challenged, unable to be like, well, actually, like this is kind of there was a vibrancy to the entire event and the entire experience, which I think shows the not only the effect of the signal that it reaches people that they can process and then relate back to, but also can change, if that makes sense, with different environments or different people, different kind of resonances.
Yeah, I've always really liked this term, and I can't remember where I originally held it, but it's like strong opinions held loosely. It's like
Mhm.
if you come and discuss, I will fight tooth and nail, but not to prove my point, but to understand my own view a little bit better. And I think
Mhm.
I dug up this article from 2016 that I'd written, and it was funny because reading it, I was talking about using argument as a way to help you better understand your own ideas, basically like steel manning your own ideas. No other intention in a debate. And the utility I found in it is, I detach from my identity in this idea, right? I go above it and I go, yeah, yeah, this is the idea I'm taking part. And when they make points about where the idea is weak or why it doesn't hold up, if you have a good debate, what I would call a good debate partner, I would I would argue that um, I would argue that it gives you the opportunity to refine it very, very well, and gives you opportunity to shift yourself. And it's funny because at the time that I wrote it, I thought totally differently about the world. So I'm reading about myself, talking about how to change yourself, and also knowing that this is before I made very drastic changes to my ideas. And so what I saw it is like, this is the soil that I planted a bunch of seeds in, and I had no idea what was going to get grown. And it's almost like
Yeah.
coming back and looking at like a deep, intense jungle and realizing that at one point you had dropped all these seeds, and that nothing but, I mean, not nothing, but an insane amount of like positivity came out of that thing. And so it's kind of, I reposted just because it wasn't written very well. It's not my favorite piece, but it really spoke to something that I believe in, is the exchange of ideas. And the only way
Mm.
that happens is if you're not defending them, if that makes sense.
It
Um,
does. Yeah.
I'm trying to think, like politically, it could be very interesting. Like I am very like socially liberal, and I'm pretty fiscally conservative. Like I think freedom of choice is probably the most important aspect, but it's not a single issue because obviously like some regulation comes in somewhere. So I'm fairly down the middle, but I I would entertain the idea of voting one way or another for an extreme politician. Like I can kind of see why somebody would vote for this person or that person. I wildly disagree, but I also am totally interested in hearing why people might, because it gives me, the first thing is that most people do not think very deeply about their opinions.
Yes.
And second,
Yes.
maybe I'll learn something. Like I've learned a lot about, we went through, this kind of 4 years of Trump, and it was interesting because, man, I did not understand why people liked him. Like I couldn't understand it. I was having a really hard time. And then it kind of dawned on me that it has nothing to do with what he's actually saying. It has to do with how he's saying it. It's like an energy in his communication style. And it's something that I don't resonate with because it hits me and I go, oh, that's factually incorrect, or he's lying, or it's this. And I make statements about this, that, or the other, but I'm not getting the feel, when somebody can lie to you straight up, but you get a feeling that they mean well, right? They're on
Right.
my side. And that's
Right.
and as soon as I understood that, I could let go of any of the disbelief and I could move on. I'm not angry about it. I'm not whatever. Not that I was angry about it before, but I always thought it was kind of funny. It was too reality TV for us.
But it is kind of amazing with that too, where it's like this 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 dude who was, elected or whatever, um, and like he was like a giant. I view that situation almost like he was like this enormous scratching of an itch that people have. But like when you scratch an itch, you see you're breaking your skin, like you're hurting yourself. But man, the relief of the scratch, and it's like, and that's when I think back to those years, I'm like, oh my God, that was how people were just like really itchy. and here he comes. It's this scratch of the itch, and
That's
then
a
I start to kind of think
yeah,
about where else those are, and just all of the other. Not to say I have anything really figured out more than anybody else, but when you
sure.
see something with maybe like we talk about this difference between like a filter and a lens, where the filter sort of changes everything, but the lens provides wide, narrow, whatever different ways of seeing it, depending upon what you're sort of looking to see. It's kind of like, oh, I can't now unsee that or just go back to the filter where I see everything distorted and the same.
This can kind of bring us back to the subject of psychedelics, because I think this is, admittedly one of the benefits, and to like full discretion, I don't think that anybody should do them. I don't recommend them. I also, if I don't condone them, I don't condemn them. I think they're very interesting for very specific people, but those people will know, and then they can figure it out. So I have to like start with that, because I'm super not into the advertising and marketing of substances to people that you don't know. But I have
Hmm.
to say that like their use down the scientific realm is almost disgusting to me. Like it's like very off-putting to try to um, reduce and explain and come up with chemical concentrations and reactions in the brain that are uh, supposed to be representative of your experience. And I'll leave it at that, because what it if I could explain to anybody is like what you're able to do is get that view that you're talking about, right? Like a substance can, you can call it ego death or whatever. There's lots of different names, but there is a consistent experience that is too consistent to not be noticeable. And one of them is that you have this kind of subjective experience to an objective perspective, right? Which is to look at yourself from kind of above yourself and see how your actions or behaviors play out. And I think that is probably one of the most useful cases. So when people ask, when they're like, because they'll run into the same conundrum. What they're trying to do is, take it down to the molecule. This molecule does this, and it alleviates, the default mode network in the brain, and this is why it works. And you go, cool. It doesn't really matter. But in the end, it's really not that. If anything, you could just describe it subjectively in these deep experiences, and they can go south for sure. I think the reason they're useful is because they're inherently dangerous. Like there's inherently risk with it, which means there is some reward, but that you have to suss that out for yourself. But essentially, what I can feel from the experiences is that, and they used to say this a while ago, like taking psychedelics is like taking the elevator up, instead of the stairs or whatever. And I would agree with that, but I would also disagree. I would say you have potential in you as a human being. And the hard work that you do is walking the stairs. You're talking about controlling, managing your state, becoming more aware of yourself through every activity that you can possibly think of. That's essentially, spoiler alert, that's what our entire business is about, is teaching people to become more aware of themselves and
Yeah.
others. And
Yeah.
what you become aware of is that there's nothing that I can do about anybody else. I can only become aware of myself and modify myself, which is a very stoic, Zen, whatever. But if I do that hard work over consistent years, different religious practices get you there. Different athletic endeavors can get you there. The amount of enlightened bike racers that I've met is uncanny. There's just something about doing hard work for hours and hours a day for decades that gets you to this brain where, or this part in your brain where you can access this higher view. And so in, that's the hard work. What psychedelics do is they kind of slingshot you up to your potential, right? They kind of like in a passing 5-6 hour experience, you're kind of looking at what is possible if you're willing to do the work. But you are going to crash back down to where you are. It didn't fix anything. It just gave you a glimpse of what's possible. And that, I don't know how that is not helpful. It might be one of the most helpful things ever. Like if there was, I don't know, do you have any goals? Like any like physical goals, any career goals for yourself? And they
Yeah. I
could be
mean,
lofty. Like Yeah, throw me a
Yeah.
lofty one. Give me something good.
Okay. Well, I'll go on the physical side. I would actually like to do an Ironman, mostly because I don't really know how to swim.
Ooh,
So
okay, good. Yeah,
current, yeah,
perfect.
I can't swim. Yeah.
Okay. So imagine for a second that in a psychedelic experience, or it could just be, a state change of consciousness, maybe it's through breath work or whatever, you were able to see yourself in the midst of this experience, right? You could imagine yourself finishing, or you saw it directly, so directly. And there's a difference here. It's not a vision as much as it's a feeling. You have felt yourself finish this thing. And then you come back and realize that it was a hallucination, or, approximation of a hallucination. And, but you're still left with the feeling. And the feeling is that, man, that felt really good to do that thing. So instead of just it being in the back of your head, you start thinking about it. You're like, man, that was a really real feeling. I felt the tingles. I felt the sensations of the bike. I felt the pain and the fatigue in the muscles, but it was totally worth it. And you're like, the fear for swimming or something that is keeping you back from that starts to be more of a curiosity than actually something that's keeping you from doing it. Right? It's like, well, if I'm going to have those sensations, I'm going to have to go through this door. And that's really how you start to use these substances to deal with phobias and goals. And it basically looks at potentiality. If you could see your potentiality, you can do a lot. If we can show somebody that they're actually stronger than they think they are, by leaps and bounds. Like somebody doesn't know it, but we unsuspectingly change the weights, and they lift a bar and it's heavy, and they look at it and they go, "Oh, that's a new PR." And we go, "Yeah, you didn't think you could do it, so I didn't tell you the number." And now psychologically, they start questioning their other, self-imposed limitations. That that's what I care about. I'm pointing back here because this gym is back here, but that room, just so for reference, people think like, what am I deadlifting in a closet? But that's my interest in athletics. Is not, I don't
Yeah.
care about a big number. I'm not interested in setting any world records, although if that's what you're into, you're into. The interest
Sure.
in me is the unlocking thing, and that's why it's very similar to psychedelic use. It's very similar to breath work. It's very similar to bike racing. It's a practice, and that's really what I
Yes.
think that it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so much of that is like I love it, because and so much of it too is like similar to us. That's our company between the ears, like the work we do. We have a program called the Dose, where it was like it's like a dose of this awareness. And I will say on that too, like to the point, and so I'm actually in a year long like psychedelic assisted therapy training program
Mm-hmm.
for there's doctors, there's just psychonauts. There's all of the
Yeah.
it's a really cool kind of diverse group there. But like one of the dudes who was giving one of our teachers, like Bill Richards, who's been like he's like a founding father of the like modern day thing. He was saying like enough with trying to make it this compound, this molecule for this DSM thing, and like you gotta kind of his little mantra is beautiful. He's like, you gotta trust, you gotta let go, and you gotta be open. And then you just experience the thing. And I was like, what a gem. I will say also, I have done what's sort of been described as like the avalanche or the Mount Everest of psychedelics, and ibogaine into 5-MeO DMT. And when we speak of these experiences of like the elevator, this or that, and the whole ego death thing, and just how challenging the 5-MeO experience was, by far the most horrifying,
Mm-hmm.
destable, like dangerous, like yeah, like for sure, like it was
Was yours
so
synthetic?
yeah, synthetic
The
and big,
5-EMA was synthetic. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Um, but it was like it was a learning lesson for sure, but coming back
Yeah.
from that and then what it what it highlighted, which is in an state of mind that is and body and spirit and whatever that is like, so not clean and orderly and like, this state. But it was the integration element of that, the follow through, the like, okay, so what, for like the next year
Oh
was
yeah.
continuously like hard and difficult work. And I think, I'm concerned, frankly, with how psychedelics are. I think it's obviously very incredible and there's a lot of hope and there's amazing stories and stuff, but it is almost very transactional, kind of like, a capitalism sort of like, hey, I
Totally.
just got to go in, do my thing, and it's fixed. And it's like, I just don't I just don't see how that's any different than all of the other stuff
Totally.
that we're talking about, because it's a process, it's a practice, it's not just the compound.
Yeah, it's. I think you're right. It's not going to be a panacea. Not that the medicines themselves aren't very very effective, but you are orchestrating their distribution off of a very corrupt and bad system, like a badly incentivized system, which is not trying to seek autonomous health, but it's trying to seek dependency. And I noticed it. I mean, I've never done ibogaine. I haven't been drawn to it. There was really no reason. I do know quite a bit about it because I looked into it because I was kind of on like a, whatever journey. I've used quite a bit of in ayahuasca ceremonies and psilocybin, and I would say that probably the third is San Pedro. Quite a bit of experience with San Pedro. So between the cactus, the vine, and the mushroom, close to 500 experiences or something. I quit
Mm.
counting at like 100 in ayahuasca, but um, the depth of it is kind of what you're talking about. You're talking about understanding like the how to let go, how to surrender to the idea that you can change. I think maybe it works best when people are at their like kind of last ditch effort to try to heal themselves or understand themselves. You see very profoundly good things happen, and I think that that's because of kind of what you described. I would say that, and this is not talked about very much because mostly people are talking about how can we take these from indigenous practices and like put them into a first world capitalistic healthcare system. And that's the mismatch. Because I think what you're seeing is when you use these things indigenously, people do not use them because they are emotionally or mentally injured or diseased. They use them for physical corrections in their body. Um, and that would be if you go back and you take like the general use, and it could be medicine men from 100 to 10,000 years ago, you have one consistent thing, and that is that they knew about how to control the state of a person, right? That was like unbelievably overwhelmingly consistent between every civilization, every hunter gatherer group that we found, is that we found drumming and drumming in coordination and in close relation to medicine. That's because the rhythm of beats sets your brainwave. So theta, delta, alpha, all of these things can be modulated. So you hear that traditional shamanic beat, boom, 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 boom. It'll be under a certain amount. The reason why it's so transcendental is because the beat is highly predictable, right? So you listen to that for 20 minutes and your brain knows what's coming next. So it sets up a pattern in your brain, not to reduce this down to scientific jargon or not, but it basically puts you into a state where you can relax because the future is predictable. Everything is safe. The sound allows you to go into a deep parasympathetic state, one in which that we know that you rest and digest. Your body actually starts to heal itself. So it's a controlled healing pattern. So that's the first thing to notice about traditional medicines, is that music was basically the foundation for it in most cultures. And if it wasn't the foundation, it was closely related to the practice. Only in 14 to 15% of the, in societies that we found, is there known use of psychoactive substances. And I think it's going to be higher once we kind of understand how they were using them. But that's the evidence so far. I think it's probably closer to a quarter or half. But conservative wise, let's say 15% because that's what the data says. The next thing that you're taking out of context when you apply, plant or other kind of medicinal use into a population like this is Dunbar's number, right? So Dunbar's the groups of 150 people. The importance of that can't be overstated, and I see it now because I've been a part of so many of these ceremonies where you bring people in. It's a great appropriation of indigenous practices. They're wonderful. Like the music is great, the people are lovely, everybody's saying really cheerful, happy things, and it's all blessed light and happiness and all the fucking spiritual gaslighting wisdom that you could ever get out of anything. And then they take your $500 a night, and then the blessings, brother, and well wishing, and then they go on. And the thing that you're missing is in traditional societies of 150 people or less, you're dealing with one medicine man that has an intrinsic incentive to get you better, right? So
Mhm.
there, it's not a here, take this thing and hopefully it works. It's a we're going to try this, and when that doesn't work, we're going to try this, and when that fails, we're going to do. They never stop trying to help because they are deeply connected to one another, and
Mhm.
that is the key ingredient that you can't sell in America. You can't sell community. You can try. I mean, CrossFit has been trying for decades, but we
Yeah.
all know that if it's arbitrary or it's like falsely held up in this subgenre or subculture, it doesn't really have a stranglehold. And that's one thing that we've been trying to be very aware of is that when people come in, they have very meaningful experiences, right? And that's by design. We want people to have meaningful experiences, but we also understand that there's this deep sense that they want to belong to something. And
Mhm.
that is most often used in our culture, not to be a cynic, but maliciously, not maliciously, but negligently, maybe is the better, maybe it's not on purpose, but they use this meaning making to sell things. And I do think that's because if we look at our programming from like the big, capitalistic point of view, it's make money, make money, make money, make money, be productive, be productive, be productive. These are this is the messaging: hustle, 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 so you can get more, more, more. And if that's going to happen, that underlying program doesn't really go away. So you add plant medicines on top of this and see that it's valuable for people, and you take their intimate, emotional, and deep healing states, and you kind of leverage that to do one ceremony after the other, do another one, keep the healing process up, because that's dependency. And what you see is like, even in these people that denounce allopathic medicine, right? Like, these what I call plastic shamans. People go down to Peru, or they go to a retreat center and they get a certificate, and now they can serve ayahuasca or whatever, and they come back wearing shipibo garb and all white, and they're basically levitating into the fucking room, and they're gonna provide all sorts of guru. They basically listen to Wayne Dyer for a year, and they just quote him and then serve powerful medicines, and there's a huge difference. That like they're even if they're well-meaning, even if they are good people, and I know a lot of them are good people, subconsciously they have this societal conditioning to get more and more and more, and that happens by leveraging people's experiences.
Yeah. I think it's so difficult because I don't know about difficult, but like obviously we exist within the sort of constraints of capitalism and financial requirements and this and that. But when it comes to community, there's this need for obviously connection, and there is this need for meaning and belonging, and to exploit that, I do think is like that is malicious. That is, and the best way to like rile up people is to have some sort of external threat or an enemy, or something to have this sort of faux inherent or intrinsic need to heal the person or have the person come together. And
Mhm.
so like just this constant creation of enemies that provide the tension or the sort of pushback to have then this camp or this tribe of like now it's Russia, now it's this people, now it's those people, now it's, all of these things, and that just does seem like that's like building a house with like the siding first versus like the
Yeah.
foundation and the framing. And
Yeah.
um yeah, so getting back to a little bit about, this stuff too with fitness, because obviously, there's medicines and compounds, and even I was listening to somebody talk about psychedelic use, and he's been in the world. He's a sound guy. I'll send you the podcast. It was fascinating. Um, but he was like saying, he's like, yeah, I don't really like calling them medicines just because of the loaded sort of implications with that. He's like, these are like technologies that
Yeah.
they're just technologies. Like that's what he refers to them as. Which with the music thing is interesting because with Iboga and the Bwiti tribe, their music
Mhm.
is wild. It is
Oh
like
yeah.
totally chaotic.
Yep.
And they were saying that the the Iboga showed them the instruments to build during the journey, and then they built it, and you're like, holy crap, this is this is so unlike anything I've ever heard before.
This is no bull, and this is what's so fundamentally strange about this because no one really knows where there's lore that comes behind where these substances were discovered and iboga the Buitui are I mean they didn't crack you over the head right because they used to the how I understand the
There's
original
partying.
ceremony was like yeah it's like crack open and let out the spirit so they basically give you a concussion at the end hopefully they they change that part but that, yeah these wild stories about what came first or whatever I like your point to not calling it medicines I had a guy who facilitated for me incredibly talented like I mean the most unreal musical talent that I've ever heard and very good at working with this plant in general and he said right off the bat, he goes, because somebody said like plant medicine to try to talk about it. He's like, look, if you're not sick, it's not medicine. If you're well, it's a teacher. And that's it. They're using it to learn. And that always clarified for me what I was coming to it with, which is like, oh, I'm here to learn. And this is why I should be quiet and I should listen because it's like I can learn something from the experience. From the maybe the generation of or the revelation I should say of musical instruments or whatnot it's you can't that sounds like bullshit until you have some of these experiences and you go oh no that makes sense early on I met a kid I don't know how it happened but I met a kid who cooked his own ayahuasca right? And I'd heard about him, and he had never sat with a shaman. He had never sat. He had no training in it. He was a cook. I was a chef down in like Arizona, and a friend introduced me to him. I don't know how he met him, and he came and taught me and my friend how to cook ayahuasca in a crock pot. And I was like listening to him, and it was very like he just had this process, and I was like, "Where did you learn this?" And he was like, "Well, originally I was trying to extract DMT, but then I found a recipe that I kind of put together that I could figure out how to make ayahuasca, so I made it. And then the first time it didn't work." And then I had a dream that night and it taught me how to fix it. And the next day I recooked it and took it and it worked. And then from there, every time I took it, it taught me how to refine it. So it told me to quit using aluminum to cook in. It told me to use glass to, to store me in. And like all of these really bizarre things where it's essentially he's claiming that the plant is the instructor. And whenever he sits with the plant, it teaches him how to refine the process. All the way to the point where he was called egg white leaching. So this is something that they don't do in the traditional brew that he had figured out. And maybe some of it had to do with some internet forum stuff, but essentially he said it was a pure revelation. He claimed as a pure revelation that the tannins in the ayahuasca are what make you physically very ill. Like your gut has a very hard time processing them, and you're more likely to eject it, which is not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. Vomiting is purging is part of it, but he claimed that the revelation told him to use half half an egg white for every ounce of reduced ayahuasca, and he could clarify the tannins out. So he would cook it, cool it, bring it to a boil, drop egg whites into it, let it simmer down, cook. The egg whites boil out, and he pulls it out, and the egg whites leach the tannins out, and you get this very pure substance. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen because we did it and it works. It like legitimately works. And it was all based off of this revelation. So you saying that the Buitu tribe learned how to make instruments that are insane is completely realistic in my experience. And I think other people could laugh, especially people with like, the skeptics, because I was one of them. And they'd be like, oh, they're just, hallucinating, they whatever. Uh, but in my experience, that is dead true. Have you done anything other than iboga and 5-meo?
No, not yet.
Um, those are those are strong
Yeah,
substances.
they're pretty strong. Yeah, yeah. I have a couple ideas kind of coming up or things coming up, but and as the teaching, as the teacher, and not to, have it be something that helps me finish a book or, wrap up a project, or like not this. I don't view these as like springboards for outcomes and products, but genuine, you know, um, for me at least, with some of the things that I struggle with, with like paralysis and analysis and and like the known, and just different things. It's like they're beautiful reminders of like the we because Elon Musk exists. It's like, look at us, we've got the iPhone and the
Mhm.
SpaceX, and like we're so smart. And it's like, no, the dumbest thing I've ever thought was that like my mind is really smart by my own doing and my own, again, like fabrication. And but that is where I think with some of the stuff, kind of started saying like shouting philosophy in the gym while working out, but like I see this very much as a similar practice that you do, that Andrew Tracy's kind of guiding people through, that we do, that I don't know. I don't think there's many that are like in like exploring this, because it's not like how many reps or what the weight was or what your time or some sort of performative measure. And in a world that's, I think, trying to explain everything with research and
Mhm.
theories, we're kind of being like, look, just have the experience, and that's it. Like, what did you notice in the experience? And people do have these moments of insight. I'm not gonna say necessarily like divine intervention or any
Mhm.
sort of intervention, but like these surges of a state. Maybe it was a little bit of a peace, maybe it was anger, maybe it was whatever it was. And not to say though, like, hey, this workout, this FYF, or this, engage
Mhm.
session that we do, or this piece of equipment is going to give you, this is going to repair the relationship with your dad, because like, not, you know what I mean? Like, but that's
Yeah,
what's so
but this
cool.
is such a good. This is such a good way to put it. Actually, to like put it in the context of like, imagine thinking that like 3 sets of 10 something would repair like childhood trauma. I mean, like that. It's the same. I get the same laugh out of somebody thinking that if they take 5 grams of psilocybin, they're somehow not going to deal with like a youth rape scenario. I think you're right. Like maybe that was what my attraction was originally to substances like that, is because it really reflected what I had felt inside a training, either on a bike for racing bikes or in a gym, scenario.
Mhm.
I felt very powerful sensations that had nothing to do with rep sets or weight. It had something to do with just placing myself in an environment. And I think maybe I solidified this lesson later with some substance use that I think I was coming to learn, and I thought I knew what I was going to learn. And it really slapped me back and made me learn the hard way. And then I had to be really careful about saying that I want to learn, because learning, I don't think most people realize this, but to say that I want to learn something essentially is saying that you're rewriting what you know, right? You're either filling a gap or changing something. And that hurts. That is not a pleasant experience. Like when I've learned a lesson, what is it? It's usually I learned the lesson the hard way.
Yeah.
But who learns it the easy way? I've never met that person. Right. So it intuits the same thing about like people come into a gym space and they go, oh, I'm going to get strong or I'm going to develop X quality. And you go, yeah, but if you know what you are going to learn, then you wouldn't need to learn it. And the same thing is true for physical efforts. Like to to assume that you know the lesson already means it's you're not doing the right thing in order to actually learn the lesson. And so it's rewritten a lot of how I feel, like the creativity process, the openness to the day. And this is something that we try to teach people, um, albeit mixed unsuccessfully, successfully, in how to be creative on the day to give people a physical experience that they can pull something out of that you're not dictating what they should pull out of. That has been probably the biggest realization and also the biggest challenge that we've recognized that our work is, kind of geared towards in this fitness industry space, which to be fair, and I've been trying to talk about this for a little bit, I don't think people realize what they're up against. You notice the frustration, like people that are like coaches in the fitness business, they're like, ugh, man, like it just sucks. And they have this like very downtrodden, cynical perspective of what their worldview is, that the world sucks, right?
Yeah.
Even though they're still doing their job, they are dismayed by non-compliant clients seeking easy button answers and formulaic application of practices and yada yada. You could name all of the stuff. We take that, if you're a good coach, you will criticize that person because they're not getting the results that they want because they're not good at practicing. That might be true, so I don't want to take that off the table, because I hear a lot of coaches just get pissed that somebody didn't do what they told them. And I go, well, that's not the job actually, to tell people what to do. The job is to problem solve with a person so that they end up changing their behavior in a way that you both agree to. And sometimes you have to trick them into it, but essentially you have a job of manipulation. You understand where they need to go. They have told you where they need to go. You know how they need to get there, and your job is to try to trick them into that path, or not just trick, but lead them to the path that works for them. Whether that has to do with changing their diet, their training, their lifestyle stuff, doesn't really matter. It's just that is your job. But there's another side to this that I don't think is talked about enough, and that is what you are as a coach. Like okay, I am a fitness coach, for lack of a better term. So I am concerned with people's overall well-being first and foremost, and then maybe some performance metrics on top of that. If you don't have the well-being down, you will never get the performance. If you leverage performance against health, you'll always lose. And then you'll lose because then the person is in a worse spot than when they started. Most people come to me ready to leverage and lose, and we have to turn them away because we don't have time to teach them that they're wrong in their approach, that they're too late, they're in dishealth, that the weight that they want to lose or the body that they want is on the other side of other corrective, like psychology. Like a lot of this is limited in our head, obviously, but a lot of it has to do with, man, you thought that you wanted to change your body, but you didn't realize that was opening up a huge problem between you and your partner who doesn't want you to change, or your change is a reflection of their inability to change, and now you have marital problems because you're training. And that is something that occurs so commonly, and people
Yeah.
laugh at it, but that's a legitimate problem that we have with people. It's the first question I get with people wanting to make drastic transformations. How long will it take? And I go, well, how fat is your partner, or how unhealthy is your partner, or what is their state, because that will largely dictate your state. And you don't think so, but you start shedding 15, 20 pounds, looking good, feeling good, and your partner hasn't done that, they're going to start baking you cakes and brownies and shit to slow you down. And not because they don't love you, but because they're looking at you changing, thinking that you're accelerating, and they see themselves as stagnant. So it becomes a real issue. But on top of even the interpersonal client coach connection, how you now have industrialized bad incentives all around, right? Our culture has made it so that the obese person is the best customer, right? Like it's by design, that the person that is overweight or obese needs more food, right? Generally speaking, um, they buy things that they don't or can't use or quit using, so they keep rebuying stuff. They have the most need for entertainment because they have the highest sedentary rate out of pretty much anyone in the population. And then when their metabolic diseases catch up to them, they need the most pharmaceutical intervention. And when the pharmaceutical intervention can't continue to keep them quote unquote healthy by the numbers, they then need drastic medical intervention. So we're talking about an upsell if you look at it the right way. This is not a problem that is trying to be solved. It is a problem that has been solved, which is how do we get people to nonstop consume? Well, we
Yeah.
engineer food types that are so palatable that you can't stop eating them, that they overwrite literally neurotransmitters in your brain so that you will continue to crave these foods over foods that are actually have healthful impact. In fact, they are so palatable that they make healthy food for you taste bad, right? You take,
Yeah.
ugh, what's that? You can't even, like, they manipulate your whole sensory experience. And then on top of that, uh, you get to the food type thing, but then the pharmaceuticals are just basically the goal of the United States healthcare system is essentially to keep people on prolonged medications. And if you don't understand what the incentive would be for that, it's pretty simple. It's just economics. If I
Yeah.
cure a disease, no more money. If I treat a disease for a lifetime, lots of money. So Ozempic will become the fastest growing, most profitable drug of all time. Now, granted, I, I raised the alarm bell about it because there's some issues with muscle wasting, but semaglutide is a long chain peptide that has some phenomenal uses in type 2 diabetics,
Yeah.
adult onset diabetes. That being said, its side effect is for weight loss is real. The reason why it's dangerous is because people will not proactively protect themselves against the wasting away part. They won't feel hungry, and the foods that they do want to eat will be low quality, so they will fall into malnutrition even worse than they already are. uh, and they won't protect by having increased protein or amino acid profile or activity to mitigate the muscle wasting. So they will see. I'm not even going to talk about the psychological problems of like suicidal ideation, but I think in the next 10 years you'll see an extreme explosion of osteoporosis,
Yeah.
probably young age mortality rate by falling, stuff like that from people that will use this for a lifetime. So when you're a coach and you're trying to make people better, you have a whole industry that is working against you. And so when you feel that frustration, you don't know what that frustration is. You blame it on the person that's in front of you that's unable to change. But what might allow you some help in this industry is a little bit of compassion and imagining that if somebody is asleep, and I'll use this term asleep all the time because I think it's a synonym for or an antonym for attention, right? Uh, Imagine if somebody was asleep, you can't really blame them for something. They're not conscious of what they're doing, right? They get up, sleepwalk, they fall down the stairs and like break your pot or something, right? And you're like, oh, I really liked that pot, or I really liked that vase, or I really liked that thing that you broke, or you crashed into the TV when you were asleep. But immediately our conscious, like our subconscious, is like, I can't be as mad at that person because they were not in control of their actions. Well, take that over and apply it to just normal behavior. You see a baby crying, right? And your first thought, besides if it's not your kid being irritated, is like, well, there's probably three things: the kid's hungry, tired, or unloved, right? It's like one of those three things. But something happens when we become walking, talking adults, and those three problems go away. But those are still the three problems. You meet somebody in a traffic incident that's yelling at you and freaking out, and you're like, man, that guy sucks. He's a bad person. I wish he would die. But really, the question is he hungry? Is he tired? Is he unloved? Right?
Yeah.
And one of those is probably true, and it changes the aspect. The other thing that I'll throw in there after those three is like, are they unaware? Are they asleep? most people are asleep. And I don't mean physically eyes closed sleep. I mean that their cognitive process for understanding the world is on autopilot. Driving to work is on autopilot. Doing work is on autopilot. Watching Netflix is on autopilot. Most relationships are had, most interactions are had on autopilot. When you wake somebody up, what do you get? You get somebody who's kind of terrified, right? You've seen those videos of like the person sleeping in the car and and they come alive and they start freaking out and they're like, oh God, it's a heart attack. When we talk about making people aware, I'm very aware that this is actually what you run into. I make somebody aware of the poison that is involved in the food that they're eating, or the relationships that they're involved in, or the lifestyle that they have ignored for 40 years. And suddenly the panic starts to overwrite what I'm saying, right? And so I have to think about clear and concise ways to gently wake people up to little things here and there so that they can be aware that actually you have $1 trillion organizations that are looking to undo them. Like their dis-ease and their unhealthiness is a profit margin to them. And as you start to wake people up, some people will panic and go the other way. But the more people you can wake up to this, the better, because then collectively we can have constructive conversations about food quality and lifestyle and kind of what the pressures of society are kind of leading to.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because it is almost that, like, awareness sounds like, oh, like just like learning. It's like, yes, like awareness, learning, like awesome. And it's like, and then you're in some painful shit and you're like, hey, this is learning. You're like, no, 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 this is not learning. It's like, no, it is actually. And like the
This is
awareness,
torture.
yeah, this is torture. But and then all of a sudden, like, aware, well, now you see, now you actually are, like, the burden of responsibility with what you see. Now you look at the person. We live in an area where I would generally say there's many many sleep drivers, for one.
Oh.
But and it's like chasing the things and all of the whatever, the shekels and the tokens and the status stuff, and I'm not really into any of them, but it's like when you are aware or are becoming aware, and I'm certainly not making claims to be like the enlightened one or an enlightened one or anything like that, but like through my own process, it's like, well, now I have to look at the things that I've been in an environment with the culture and with society and with things that really not only celebrate, but make it very easy to turn away from. So, of course, this person is going to consciously or subconsciously not want to open their eyes, not want to see. And your bit about compassion, man, talk about some, like, we do hard things, like, yeah, offering some compassion and some grace to someone who is living in this life, in this world, that I would believe there's at some point within them a recognition of, don't look, like deny, like, don't look over there, don't become aware. And it's super difficult because you see, you can be like, yeah, but if you just sort of saw what is really going on, perhaps the problems that continue to be spoken about could maybe be ameliorated or maybe be down a bit. Like, it's not the next thing that's, we had my former job, I was, in the military, and um my team sergeant and I were talking late one night, and we were like, we were talking about a certain area of the world and a certain mission. And we're like, yeah, the problem is that the solution is the problem. And that's what we're entangled and grappling here. And for us, I think in the fitness space, like, there's almost this perpetual sort of, I don't know if you've noticed this too, but like healing, like healing is like, I'm on my, and yes, people are on healing journeys, and I get
Yep.
it, but it's like the best way to be on this healing loop is to constantly be sick, or constantly, like, if you keep breaking your leg, you're always going to be healing. Like,
Yeah.
you're just in this Sisyphean like situation. And
Yeah, if I
man,
could offer, you're not on a healing journey, you're on a healing roller coaster. Like you're just doing the same thing over and over again and
Yeah.
thinking that it's a thrill, but you're literally just on a manufactured loop, and the
Yeah.
things that you're damaged by, you're exposing yourself to. And I think that's a very common, actually.
Yeah, the
um
within the psychedelic space even too, or
oh yeah.
some of the philosophical underpinnings within that, they're like, a lot of the people who are advocates for like, obviously responsible use and whatnot, they have this
Mhm.
beautiful metaphor, which is like Ralph Metzner, I read it from. He was saying like when you plant something, back to what you were doing previously, when you like plant something, you have this plant, it's the roots are growing. You can't continually unearth it to check to make sure that there's roots. Like you have to
Yeah.
let it be in the thing. And I think that's something with the practice of using physical movement, of using, what you're putting into your, are you aware of your body in space and time? Are you aware of how you are walking in? We don't even have at our gym, we don't have a set workout. We have programming like for the week or whatever. Um, but like somebody might do like a lower body session today.
Mhm.
Someone else in the same training session might just do like some cardio conditioning with some breathing protocols, and it's like they're both there at 9 in the morning. They're teaching us, they're telling us, we're checking in with their state, but it's not an easy thing for people to digest, because they're like, well, I come to the gym, you're just like, you're the expert, you're supposed to tell me what to
Tell
do.
me
I'm
what
like,
to do.
yeah. And we're like, and so we were like, you know what, because we had a CrossFit gym for a long time, and it's, um, obviously done a lot for a lot of people, and we're grateful for that, for what that's done. But when we opened up between the years, we were like, we're not doing, our enemy is actually in many ways, like within the little fitness slice of it, our enemy isn't the gym around the corner. Our enemy is the calendar telling people what they should do on a set day. And if we can remove that and now partner with them and be like, all right, so what do we got? It's
Yeah.
amazing to see that click.
The harm that you see from like structured programming that never considers the person consider their own state before they apply X amount of stress
Yeah.
is probably one of the most devious, damaging things that is just an inherent truth, because we get told, shut up, fucking train hard, shut up legs, like we're basically admonished to David Goggins our way into fitness, like, but this is not the use of it. The use of it is, and I would say the same thing. It's like the analogy there for me is like thinking that psychedelics are good and that you should just put it in the water supply, right? Oh, everybody should
Mhm.
do it. And you're like, that's the same thing with fitness. It's highly potent, right? And especially you get into intense training with heavy loading and heavy central nervous system fatigue. These are not things that should be applied willy nilly. And I agree with you. We ran into that same issue when people just we mapped our system a little bit differently. Probably a lot. It's probably really close to what you were talking about. Where I go, people are coming to learn here, so they don't need us. Therefore, they're
Right.
going to learn to come up with their own sessions based off of themes. We still have like a running program. Hey, here's if you want to use the energy of the group and you want to use intensity as a modality, here's the workout that you can do. We
Mhm.
would first say to warm up and then decide what to do. And
Mhm.
sometimes that'll be, now that I'm warm, I don't feel like doing that. And you go, cool. Figure out what would be beneficial to you. Most of the time, it's cardiovascular, easy aerobic stress, or it's mobility work, or sometimes it's actually, no, I just need to lift a heavy weight and then get out of here. And you're like,
Yeah.
cool. That process takes maybe a year to learn for most people if they're actually wanting to learn it, right? Which is
Mhm.
engaging with them and trying to ask them how they feel after certain sessions or what kind of training affected them a certain way. And they are conscious of this process while it's going on. After a year, I find that most people don't need us. Now, that doesn't mean they know how to do everything,
Right.
but I think they could show up to a gym and figure it out. And that's really what our goal has been, is to not just facilitate people's addiction to high intensity exercise or their hustle culture mentality. The 6 a.m.ers are the worst. They're like, there every time, but they also never get better. And this is what drives me crazy. I'm like, you're wasting an hour of your day and you're not getting any better. Like, just sleep in, man. Like, if you could choose, just sleep. I have one thing that I don't want to lose. You mentioned that you're not enlightened. I would ask you, I have a very simple kind of equation for figuring out levels of enlightenment. What is your most toxic trait? Like, what is the thing that you think is the thing that you're aware of that you're just like, man, I wish that wasn't me.
I can be incredibly vindictive to the point of I want to go off to foreign lands and exchange in the transmission of life. To like,
Fair.
that vindictive, I guess, like that justice seeking vindictive, just that part of
Yeah.
to varying, right? There's like an escalation of force with that. Of course, if somebody busts into my home, like
Sure.
I'm not going to hold any, kind of qualms about that. But the the above and beyond, the orders of magnitude greater than what's probably like called for,
Yeah.
like I think that's pretty, for me, like I noticed that's toxic because not only is it like kind of fucked up to like, and I'm not like a raging maniac. Like I
Sure.
don't like fighting. Like I don't like doing that. Like I'm not like kicking in people's like car doors if they like, do whatever. But like, man, I really go there and super quick and it was, in a job that was like, yeah, right on, man. You're right what we're looking for, like we'll
Yeah.
reward you. But also like, golly, do I pay a price for that? I like the toll
Yeah.
that my inner world has paid for that. Has certainly, I've had my eyes open to that in the past
Yeah.
couple of years. And it's yeah, that's a tough one.
I mean, it's just, I don't think people look into it, right? Like they feel these negative emotions or they feel these sights and it doesn't feel good, but also I am
Mhm.
also driven to more than justice. Like, I like retribution. Like,
Mhm.
I think people should pay in the deepest sense for crossing me the wrong way.
Yeah,
And that is a knee jerk reaction that I also have to be like, okay, most people are not malicious. Most people are just asleep. And
yeah,
therefore, it's like me attacking some sleeping people, which doesn't give me a good visual. So that's usually but what I would say is like, understanding your like toxic or negative traits, I think that is the path of enlightenment. And enlightenment
yeah,
not being some Eastern place that you arrive, but in the place that you arrive internally, the landscape internally starts to be a flourishing garden because you know where the weeds are. And
yeah.
you can't really kill those parts off because it's all an ecosystem. Like, I
Mhm.
don't have what was hard for me to contend with was like, without this negative or toxic trait that most people do not appreciate about me, I don't have the other, right? I don't have the deep sense of loyalty like to
Yeah,
other people who have, I don't, that doesn't exist without this like idea of retribution. So therefore, once I recognize it, I can go, okay, I'm aware that I tend to go off this side, but I'm not trying to get rid of it because something happens to Aaron or Mark or the people that I care about. You bet
right.
your ass I'll be there in a second with a pitchfork and whatever, ready to burn shit down because that's just in my personality. I think you can activate me and weaponize me, and I can be kind of easily manipulated, which is why I have to be very careful about people that I am loyal to.
Yeah, man, that's so fun. Agree 100%. It's similar in that, like, I look at that and I think like, the whole like killing that part of you or whatever, like it's just
Mhm.
such nonsense, like internet hype talk. But man, it's again, like, I think it's like another itch because
Yeah.
and I'm the same thing, like deeply loyal. So, and frankly, like, yeah, there's sometimes I'm like, I'm embarrassed I'm not really embarrassed now. It's just what it was. It was ignorance. I was asleep. But like, you're like, man, I really like, I, I outsourced my own sort of like agency and sense of perhaps what's right to this loyal, this pseudo loyal, whatever. Maybe it's more complicated than that, but looking at the killing off the parts of yourself, or David Goggins and all of that, it's like that's just a giant itch scratcher,
Yeah.
because that part, like what you asked, that what a beautiful question, like, yeah, what's the most toxic thing about you, or that you're aware of? That is like an itch that you'd rather probably not feel. You'd rather scratch it. Pain you'd like to, distract from. And along comes this thing that is like an itch scratcher. And you're like, I don't understand. Like, psychologically and physiologically, this makes absolutely no sense. Kind of like some of like the Trump stuff. And yet it's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like David Goggins your way through dealing with a like literal component of who you are, just an activation of different things and experiences, and you're supposed to like eradicate that, because with that, yeah, goes the there's the maladaptive response to it, but then there's also the adaptive response, is like, well, I guess in many ways, for what you're doing with nonprofit and your family and Mark and all the people, it's like, but something's driving you to say, I want to do this better. I want to maybe not do this better as far as like a comparison, but serve and provide and reveal, kind of like what you were saying before.
Yeah, and maybe this brings us to my toxic trait, which is like, so this business exists out of spite. Like I hate so deeply that I want to succeed in order to shut other, like, I don't know, detractors of mine down. But that energy doesn't last anywhere, and that's like, man, I I think it brings me to my real toxic trait, which is like a deep sense of insecurity, that
Mm,
I'm not good enough. I haven't proven myself, that I'm never going to be satisfied. Like I have, sadly, counterbalanced two parts of me. One, I do think that I'm better than other people. Like, not
mhm,
not like in a sense that I deserve more or I'm entitled, but from the sense that I think more, I try harder. I think that I put more effort in than most people. And that is a deep sense of superiority to the average person. Not that I
yeah,
want harm from them or I think I deserve, but it's just, but then it's balanced by a deep sense of inferiority, which I'm never going to live up to my own expectations. And that
mhm,
cuts at me every, like, if you want to, like, an alarm bell that makes me go off and makes me more anxious and more frantic and desperate, it's I wake up and I go, I don't have that many years left, realistically.
mm,
Like, 40, fuck, half of it's gone at least, the very least. It's this ride's almost over, and I feel like, man, I'm still living in the same state. Man, I'm still doing the same stuff. I'm still talking about exercise. And that's why I get a little bit frantic. But then I relax and go, man, if I didn't have that motivation, I wouldn't show up to help people. If I didn't have
mm,
that motivation, I wouldn't sit down to write about the things that I've experienced. I wouldn't go to the work to try to, like, ensure that the teachings that I give people in exchange for money are profoundly true and that they are effective. And so I have to understand that every once in a while I fall back into that feeling of like, I'm not good enough. I'm not doing
yeah,
the right thing. I need to change. And that is where I get stuck. But because I'm aware of it, I can at least notice it and then just like let some of it go. I know it's not going to go away, but um, I can warn people around me. I can tell, hey, this is what I'm like, and they already know, obviously. So, me and Aaron have, like, probably the most open, like, dialogue in weird. I mean, if people are, we know we're pretty open about what our dark sides are, right? Like that's what we talk about most of the time is like, this is what I'm
Mm-hmm.
afraid of. And it took a while to get there. It took a while for us to mature into a place of communication, to be like, for a while, I wanted to hide all this stuff from her because I wanted to be the protector. I wanted to be the person who's capable. And I didn't
Sure.
want her to sense my fear. But what she got from that was that I was lying about something. She could sense that I wasn't being honest about my fear. And that became a distrust of me. And that amplified my fear and anxiety. And then eventually,
Yeah.
once we broke through that pattern, and it was like, oh, okay, I just need to tell you that I'm worried, actually. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. You know, we own our own businesses. I'm not real good with like planning things. So I kind of like fly off the seat of the cuff. And I'm going to be terrified pretty much all the time. And we're in one of those modes right now where I'm like, man, we jumped ship. We moved to this new loft. We're renovating our entire gym. We're changing kind of our business direction. We're changing nonprofit to be a little bit like separated from other, like siloed from other endeavors, and trying to coordinate things that are more organized. But right now, it just looks like pure mayhem. And when I wake up, I go, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And
Mm.
I start to panic a little bit. But because Erin knows, she's like, well, you just start. You just get your coffee, walk over to the gym, and start teaching. And then when you're done teaching, do something for yourself. Go play the drum or play some music, and then go get in the office, type some stuff. When you get tired of that, go out, do some stuff for yourself. And it just becomes like, once you start moving, you can tolerate, you know, the deep sense of panic. But I still have it. It's not like I'm
Yeah.
calm, cool, and collected. It's like inside, I'm like, nobody knows that I'm a faker yet. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah, of
constantly trying to
course.
prove that I'm not a faker. And I think just knowing that about yourself is what it's about. Like understanding it, dealing with it, forgiving yourself for being like that, whatever, you know, whatever the new age spiritual speak is
Yeah,
for, you know,
yeah,
finding acceptance or whatever. That is what
yeah,
they've been talking about for 5,000 years. That is
yeah,
awareness. That is the thing that every single person, like, yeah, we know everybody, like that is the suffering. The suffering is that, you know, you're not the person that you want to be. And that
yes,
once you know that, you can then try harder or not, doesn't
right.
matter.
That's what I actually think discipline is, which is
Mm.
like the efforts we take to ameliorate ourselves from the pain of knowing we're not yet who we want to be.
Ooh.
And if that's like, because that sort of, and then like kind of the whole, I don't know how, like, I'd really want to do more digging into like I don't know, some new agey person. We need like a Andrew Huberman dopamine expert combined with like a
Yeah.
shaman, you know, like a Gabor Mate, like who's like just
Yeah.
pure compassion and heart, and being like,
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that, because like that dopamine, you know, that decline of dopamine, the pain of saying I need to motivate action to do and pursue and to get the thing, and using the function of the, you know, dopaminergic system. Well,
Hmm.
that's the root of discipline. Like I think that's the
Hmm.
pain, is the pain of not being who we can be or who we aspire to be, and the things, the actions we take to ameliorate the pain, to not feel the pain. Like that's discipline. That, to me, I think that's discipline, or a disciplined pursuit. I don't know. I just kind of blacked out for a second, but
Oh no, I like that thought. I think it was Mike Tyson who just said this the other day, I think, and he said like his idea of discipline is learning to love what you don't like,
mm,
right? And that is like, man, at first you're like, oh, whatever, and then you kind of think about it and you go, yeah, that's basically like, I don't like the feeling of hard exercise. Actually, I like the result from it. So I learned to like the process in order to get the other thing. And I
mm,
don't like sitting down to write. And there's your, you know, your dopamine response is basically in the sitting down to write 1,000 words a day is not fun. It's painful, actually.
mhm,
But the response is delayed gratification, because once something comes out clear and concise and it resonates with people, now I get a flood and I get the results that I was looking for.
mhm,
People are able to understand my view of the world, and that is all I've ever wanted, really. was like, I want somebody to understand how I see the world. They don't have to see it like that, but I want them to understand where I'm coming from. And that's the pain in learning to write or take pictures or, sing.
Yeah. Well, there's also like a deep sense of just wanting to be like, not to be like the Brene Brown, but like just being sort of seen and like as a human, like being acknowledged, like, like, yeah, the work that you're doing, the creation, the revelation, the interesting, the pursuit of learning, I find incredibly valuable. I mean, I don't follow every single space program. Like, I think I'm doing it well because, like, it's not like, "All right, this is what I'm doing today," kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like, it's like the anti-program. It's like, "No,
Yeah.
fuck faith, don't this isn't a Monday through Saturday thing."
No.
But, like, I find that what you and the crew and everybody are doing, it's like, "Oh, this is really cool. This is what a gift it is." And yeah, like the lack of acknowledgement, perhaps it's like, going into that, like wanting to be acknowledged, wanting to, not in a, grandiose, like, oh, I need to be, like
Yeah.
worship. No, like the purity and the truth, like it's right and true that
Yeah.
what is being asked or perhaps yearned for is being acknowledged as the human being that you are. And I don't know, I'm not trying to kiss your ass. I love what you guys are
No.
doing. Big fan, obviously,
I,
like all good.
I dude, I really appreciate it. I think these things, like, because this is the hard. So when people come to a symposium, we don't know what's going to happen, but I
Yeah.
do know, like, the mechanisms that are involved are, if I'm not honest about myself, other people won't be. And so essentially it becomes about what we say is like cutting your own belly open and like letting things out to let the, vulnerability kind of act as uh, a contagion almost, right? Like, you see one person is able to be honest about themselves and be open about what they're working on, and then you see it kind of multiply. And it's not. I should reframe this, because there is a fucking vast difference between self-assessment and self-deprecation, and I think one might start, but it usually ends with the other, because people love to say that they're on the healing process, but really they're just self-deprecating. And one of the ways that I had a hard time in instance I didn't really know how to handle, because I wrote this article kind of on the shifts that we wanted to do. We really needed to take into consideration that in order to affect an industry, we have to become a part of it and not be apart from it, because we've really
Mm,
like not paid attention to it, we've ignored it, we've demeaned it. But really, if we want people to like learn at a bigger level, we really need to integrate into it and broadcast using some of the same methods, although ethical, to get people to pay attention. And now that's not like waving a hand, pay attention to us. That's, hey, we have valuable information that will save you time and could help you. And therefore, how do we get this information out to people? So I wrote this article kind of explaining that thesis. And most of the comments are like, awesome. I got a ton of people like offering to help, from marketing to business analysis. I haven't even got back to most of them because there was just too many people offering help. And I think that was really what we were bad at. We were really bad about asking for help, about being like, hey, we need
yeah.
experts in this field, because we don't know it. People responded, and tons of comments, tons of emails, even text messages. And then there's one comment on the fucking article. And it's always one fucking comment. Anonymous guy. Hey, I think you guys would be way more valuable if Blevins shuts the fuck up and like Mark Twight gets more involved. And I was
Uh,
like, man. And when I thought about it, it's like, this is the idea. Hold on one second. This is the idea that I'm talking about, when I go, okay, I'm really good at defending myself, right? And if people
uh,
didn't know, I do everything at nonprofit. Like, I design the website, I send all the emails, I send all the shipping, I train all the people, I teach all the apprenticeship program, I come up with all the t-shirt designs, I order all the t-shirt designs, I come up with all the stickers, everything that's going on, every new symposium I'm scheduling, everything for it. That being said, that was like my first reaction. You go, okay, so that's not I don't need to actually defend this. what I always noticed is that if somebody goes to defense, it means you hit some kind of key of honesty, right? You hit
Mm,
something that is actually meaningful. So I took a
yeah.
couple days without responding. I never responded actually, but I took a couple days to think about what he meant. I went, oh, he actually pointed something that I'm very insecure about, actually,
Mm,
which is that I don't know if I could do this without Mark. I don't think I could. Like, I think in some sense, I think I'm riding Mark's coattails. That's really like what I'm subconsciously afraid of, is that if
mm,
Mark were to go away and do a different venture or not be involved in this, I'm like, who would carry it? Who would be the guy, the guru, or whatever, the
mm,
name?
mm.
And I go, that's what it is. And that is really good to be aware of, actually. And I should thank that person for bringing it to my attention that I had this kind of like subconscious insecurity that was keeping me from being like proud of myself for what I've already done. Actually, what it
Mhm.
did was make me step into it and go, no, I actually run this place and I feel good about where I'm going. And if Mark decides to retire, I'll support him 100%. He'll always be like a father figure, and I mean like legitimately a family
Mm,
member to me. And
mm.
that is the role of good mentors, is they make it impossible to fill their shoes, but they also don't want you to, right? Like
Yeah.
Mark doesn't want me to be him. He wants me to be me. And therefore somebody pointing out that I'm not him is a gift. And
Yeah.
it's like you can make these tiny little things. Now, I'm not going to say that it was all beautiful. I was fucking pissed. I wanted to like tear that person apart. Um,
Yeah.
it's not like a pleasant sight, but what it led to was actually like a very peaceful, present awareness of who I am as a person. And
Yeah.
that is the I think that is like what healing really looks like. That's what like transformation and change looks like in a very realistic, attainable level. I didn't lose any weight. I didn't, I didn't overcome any like emotional distress really, other than the like, violent rage that I felt right at the beginning of reading it. And in the end, I went about my day. I did all the same stuff, but in the background was this programming that I was unaware of. And I was able to just slightly alter the code so it didn't have control over me and my emotions. And now when I read that comment, I'm not mad at all. I'm actually like quite grateful that somebody was allowed to offer me a tool of introspection.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you were learning. Like it
Yeah,
was one
painfully.
of those, yeah, like the painful like learning of that. Man, you should like take a screen grab of that and put it on a fucking t-shirt.
Oh yeah.
I but like
We've
it's
yeah.
yeah, yeah, it is. I do appreciate that, because it's true. It's honest. And to your point about, being like vulnerable sharing, I think of course it does bother me that a lot of these concepts and these words and these ways of being maybe are like they are like latched onto, and then like everybody's got to be vulnerable, or like,
Yeah.
and I was actually having a discussion with this with a client one time. He's like, yeah, I kind of rolled his eyes, like it's a standard like dude kind of situation. He's like fuck that vulnerability stuff. I'm like, okay. I'm like, what would just like check in right now if I were to change the word and just say just honest? How does that sound? And he's like, yeah, fucking honesty, right on. I respect that. I'm like, we're talking about the same thing, man. And like, mental toughness and all this stuff. It's like, let's reduce all the noise and get to the message, which is there's just a, there's like a energy to truth and an energy to honesty. And I do think that that is felt, and that not
Mhm.
under not you know understood by like we proved it out with the evidence, but the experience feels true and right. And yeah, I mean, just going back to it, that's I think such a that is such a it's such a powerful thing that certainly Symposium did. Obviously the space program at like the daily sort of weekly, formulation of that. It's cool, man. It's really cool. Thank you for what you're doing. It's cool.
I appreciate it, man. I think we're on the right. I mean, I should say I know that I'm kind of on the right path because it grows now. It's like an organic mixture. It's not out of control. The people that need to get involved with it. We have deep and meaningful relationships with people after they come here. Most people come here multiple times to experience something like that. We also sometimes tell people not to come back, not because they're bad, but because they haven't done the work yet. And we don't want to see the same person back here. We want, and not that
Yeah.
everybody needs to make a 180-degree change, but we, my thing is like, I want to teach people so that they will go out and learn and come back and teach me like that.
Yeah.
That is the root of it for me. I like fast tracked, amplified, or exponential learning rates. And so if I can teach people how they can learn about themselves, they can learn about themselves better, faster, and among different people. That comes back to me. You know, famously, at least for us, I've shared things with certain people, and they come back and bring me these tidbits that are like, they're life changing. You know, and the only way I can be open to that is to continue to like be open to changing the process and sharing it with people like yourselves and your wife. And that has been, you know, something I'll always be indebted for, is like this opportunity that we got with whatever it is this thing is. Business, sure, but kind of like quasi wannabe cult following kind of deal. So I appreciate you guys supporting. Man, I could go on for, I could talk to you guys for
Yeah.
forever, but we'll have to plan another one. And if there's something else useful, we can plan it out.
Yeah, dude, that sounds great. That sounds great. Let's call it because we could definitely we could definitely go down and keep going. I think my wife's probably also like, where are you? Um, but yeah, appreciate it. So any kind of like if the three people still
Oh,
listening, like, you know,
okay.
like but any sort of things you want to draw people's, attention and awareness and perhaps action towards.
If you're interested in finding more, our website has everything. So it's nonprofit with a PH dot media that has tons of free articles. I mean, there's hundreds on there. There's some, there's obviously books and stuff that we publish and sell, manuals on fitness and also on philosophy. We have the space program that's also hosted on there. That's like daily training concepts, philosophy, hundreds of videos, thousands of posts, yada, yada, yada. I think pretty much everything that you'd find would be there. And if you want to learn more, feel free to email me and I can point you in the right direction, depending.
Cool, man. Michael, it's been a treat, dude. And it's painful to have to click stop recording, but I think it's what we got it's what we gotta do.
Awesome. I appreciate it, man. Well, let's do this again.
Yeah, dude.